Everybody, and welcome to the MSD workshop for this year. We have a good crowd, and we're turning people away, so you're some of the very select few coming. So welcome. I think we have a really interesting day set up for you, and an interesting topic. Well, I think so anyway. And I think the interest here in the room indicates some other people thought it was an interesting way to go. I have a couple of announcements, some basic housekeeping stuff before we start. You probably saw in that pre-show that there was a Wi-Fi signal, and we have a password which happens to be healthy, which is kind of nice. So it's on the CHSI2 network, and the password is healthy. And so given that we've only given you this as a handout, you may wish to have a look at the materials online rather than having them in printed form. In terms of the presentations here, we will be videoing the whole day, and it will be available at a later time. And so, just as a warning to you, those people who are camera shy, you will appear in starring roles if you do stand up. We have a panel discussion at the end of the day, and we're calling speakers back, and as well as some other colleagues from different areas of the workplace to take questions and to follow up on issues that have come up, because we are trying to give you, I think what I said is 5 points you should take away. So 5 times 6 is 30 points. And so you should have 30 points that you can follow up with, and any others. And so there are cards on the table. So please write your questions there now, or as we go through the day. And there's a box outside, put them in, and I will collect those and summarize those and present those to the panel at the end of the day. In terms of some basics, I always wonder which order to do this in, so I'll do it the order that's important to me. Washrooms, around the door to the right. Fire exits are in that corner and in this corner. And once you get out the doors, you go that way. So in terms then of the topic today, it's, I thought, a very cleverly crafted title. MSDs and fatigue prevention at work. And it cunningly doesn't say whether fatigue does lead to MSDs. But as we'll find, they have many of the same risk factors, and we will be kind of exploring that link between them as we go through the day. And we have a range of types of discussion. We have a more manufacturing section to start with. But we then move into a little broader idea about what fatigue might be in terms of the interaction of cognitive and physical issues. And then a much broader yet look at the office environment and the creation of a healthy environment in the office. And I think I like that idea of healthy rather than concentrating on the negative. We'll accentuate the positive. I think that's perhaps a good way to go. We have an interesting lineup of speakers, but I'll get to those in a minute. But I just did want to set the scene for what we're going to look at today. So, we'll start out with a quote. And some of you may be familiar with this quote. I was familiar with it, but I didn't know who said it. So the wonders of Google quickly set me to rights. And you may be guessing where I'm going with this, or you may not. And in a sense, that sums up some of the challenges in this area. And we had a meeting of researchers involved, and this was one of the challenges we had. It's a pretty slippery topic, and I hope that we'll make it a little clearer for you today. I would be remiss if I didn't tell you that this is jointly funded by 2 organizations, and I was remiss, but I forgot to tell you. CRE-MSD, I think many of you know, Centre Research Expertise for the Prevention of Musculoskeletal Disorders, and we have an annual workshop such as this in different topics. But as well, because we're involved in a project with Auto 21, which is a federal network of excellence looking at improving the productivity of competitiveness of the auto industry, we're also funded by them. And the issue here is that Auto 21 has a stream looking at health and safety, not only of occupants, but also people who build cars and people in the auto industry. And so we are looking in this project at the issue of fatigue and how that might affect various aspects of auto assembly, not only injury, but performance and quality. And we will hear a little bit about that as we go ahead. And those two groups are funding this conference today. I'm starting out by confusing us, and then you'll think, everything is clear later on. So we'll start you off in a confused sense. But I thought this was an interesting issue, again, to illustrate the slipperiness of this topic. And this perhaps is of more interest to academics, but it's a really nice discussion about how, unless we have a good idea about what's going on, it's really hard to make sense and move ahead with prevention activities around fatigue. So the whole field is struggling a little bit with this issue. And so we hope to not spend all day talking about difficulties. In fact, our speakers are going to talk very positively. But if I had asked each one of you for a definition of fatigue before you came in, I think we'd have had 120 different definitions of fatigue, which I think illustrates some of the challenges. So how are we going to make this clearer to you? So what is fatigue? And there's many, many, many definitions. And this is the one that I'm using for my personal purposes. So if you really wanted to, you could put Wells 2012, December the 1st. I was working with this just a couple of days ago. So the idea here is that fatigue is a process. It's not an end point. It's not specific to muscle. There's all kinds of different levels and types of fatigues. And what we're interested in is a wide range of outcomes in the workplace that would be important to a workplace. And so I've just given you three here. So human capacity, which would be either strength or endurance or ability to put widgets together. The performance, which is the ability to put widgets together, and comfort and discomfort. Just another definition, which is, again, to get a sense of how big this issue is and where the boundaries are. So it's a syndrome, a collection of symptoms, physical and psychological effect, quite broad, arising from a wide variety of causes in the workplace, resulting in both physical and mental impairments, as well as increased risk of chronic physical conditions. So this is a definition from a couple of gentlemen that I thought was also quite useful in giving us the breadth. Because I think the message I'm giving you is we're not talking only about muscle fatigue here. We're trying to take it a little broader because I think that will expose, so to speak, the full power of addressing fatigue. Because it not only has implications perhaps for musculoskeletal disorder prevention, but many other areas as well. And so it's a useful umbrella under which to consider a wide range of preventative activities in the workplace. So, whereabouts might we be interested in fatigue? And this is a pretty classic diagram, and you can see the gentleman with the haircut. I think that tells you as much as anything where this derives from. And this is one of the kind of ideas about how people interact with systems. It's some people would call this a man-machine system. And you can see we have perception, interpretations of decisions, and actions. And fatigue can interfere in all of those. We'll be talking mainly about the action piece, in this case physical, but all of the considerations from the other pathways will exist, and we shouldn't forget about them. So again, why are we interested in fatigue? And a whole bunch of reasons, and so here's some more specific ones. So all of these have question marks against them, and we hope and expect that our speakers are going to remove some of those question marks. So effects on musculoskeletal disorders. How might fatigue influence that? Effects on comfort and well-being. Effects on performance, and effects on safety and on quality deficits. So let's have a quick look at each one of those very briefly, just to see where we might be going. And our speaker's going to kind of take this a little broader as we go through the day. So I like spaghetti diagrams, and in fact, at one point I won at a conference the William Tell Award, which, for those of you who might be wondering what that is, it's for the slide with the most arrows. So I think Jim Parker, who originated this slide, probably would be a runner-up. But I think this is kind of interesting in that it shows us how fatigue affects or disturbs our whole system. So just to kind of step through it. So if we have prolonged and repetitive lifting, yeah, that loads tissue, so that's coming down one of the sides. And I think one of the pieces about fatigue is that it disturbs the normal functioning. So we can see that if we take that little arrow to peripheral fatigue, perhaps when a muscle or a tissue fatigues, or then we would see a shift to other tissues. And so now we're using a different set of tissues which may or may not be well suited to bear those loads. And the other thing I'd point out about this diagram is that there's some feedback loops. And so if we look in the corner here, we can see that we've got a nice feedback loop here, we have a feedback loop here, and we have a feedback loop here. So whenever we see feedback loops that accentuate or have a vicious cycle, we're probably a little worried. And so there is not a direct link, but there's a kind of indirect link of fatigue into some of the things that we're worried about in injury. Another look would be this kind of idea. This was an interesting study. This was from a colleague in the Netherlands. He looked at people lifting many, many times. And so this little thing down at the bottom is the actual trace of people lifting exactly the same thing many, many times. And I think what's interesting is that you start to see, well, you do see, peaks in here. And so, although it's exactly the same task, people vary. And they could vary to such an extent that on a single repetition, because of the high variability, you could see some acute event. And so one of the hypotheses that I'd like to give you today would be fatigue might increase that variability. Might. At the other end, so that was kind of the high end, the acute end, we can think of something called Cinderella Fighters. So even in fairly light tasks, and I'll use scare quotes, I always like Mike Myers, Dr. Evil, scare quotes. At low level contractions, which might be typical in some kind of office environment, although the loads are very small, they're being borne by just a very, very small proportion of the fibers. And so, although the absolute load may be high, only a small proportion of those fibers may be loaded, and so we may have a local overload, even though the muscle as a whole is fine. And so again, is this a fatigue measure? And there are some interesting studies trying to relate the loading of these small fibers to myalgia muscle pain. And the idea here is that these poor little fibers never turn off, just like Cinderella, first up in the morning and last to bed at night. So they get tired. So to address that question I asked earlier, which is, could fatigue cause MSDs? I'm going to sit on the fence there, and we'll hear a little bit about that as we go over the day, and that might form the basis of some of your questions. But I just want to kind of give you an idea of some alternatives, or one alternative at least. And that would be, if we have demanding work, that would lead to high loads on the body. And those high loads may cause direct problems. If we load a structure too heavily, maybe we'll get some micro damage to it, pain. The other pathway from demanding work to fatigue could be a pathway as well. I put a dotted arrow with a question mark so you can see I'm really hedging my bets on that one. But the idea would be, if we have demanding work, perhaps the high loads are a surrogate for fatigue. And so, although we are seeing fatigue, it could be that the pathway comes through the other side. Fatigue is just a marker that the system is being very heavily loaded. So that's something that's ongoing, and we really don't know. I don't know the answer to that one. But anyway, fatigue is not a good thing for all of the reasons we talked about. So here's some ideas about the next issue, comfort and well-being. And so this is a scale I learned about yesterday, which is called SOFI. And it kind of indicates some of the dimensions by which fatigue might affect comfort and well-being. And so I don't know if you can read that. I hope you can see some of it, but there's a piece around lack of energy, of physical exertion, of physical discomfort, lack of motivation, and sleepiness. So all of those are pieces of what might different kinds of demands lead to. And so those are all important, I think, in well-being. I think not only discomfort, but more generally well-being. And some of those outcomes may be maybe not due only to physical effects, but due to perhaps things like shift work, or long shifts, or a particular environment that doesn't provide stimulation. And so the fatigue, as we saw in that definition, can take many forms and can be caused by many things. So again, it's a kind of slippery thing. We're going to be concentrating mainly on physical aspects today, but we're going to be segueing into incorporating some of the cognitive and other issues as we move ahead. So effects on performance, I think this is probably the most straightforward one. We've all been fatigued, whatever that means. And classically, that would result in some effects on strength, dexterity, position, sense, and balance. So many, many effects of that. And we're not talking only about muscles. We're talking about a whole system. The brain, central nervous system, muscles, perception, a whole bunch of stuff. Safety, too, is kind of interesting. So fatigue in the lower limbs delays your reactions to a slip. And delayed reactions mean that you're further along in the slip before you can react. So that effects on balance control, some kinds of fatigue. So there is a link between fatigue and safety. This is a very obvious one, but fatigue could be taking place in surgery, perhaps. Which is a scary thought. Which is the point here that in a survey of surgical incidents, and I love that word incident, it's actually probably a good word. I use it certainly in preference to accidents. And we can see that fatigue was a substantial contributor to that. And these were not trivial incidents. This wasn't a cut on the finger. These were fairly serious outcomes. And so this fatigue may be neuromuscular, and that has certainly been seen in laparoscopic surgery, where people are holding these little actuators for hours at a time. Or it could be such things as more driven by circadian effects of sleeplessness and scheduling. And quality deficits, and this is a little more tenuous, but I think this is quite suggestive, and this is from a colleague in Sweden. And they asked the question, can product solutions be related to poor ergonomics? And so this has implications for both ergonomics and perhaps fatigue. We don't know the mechanism, but that's a plausible mechanism. And so poor assembly quality, is that related to quality deficits? And so I've simplified that table a little bit, but I'll just step through it. So on the extreme left, we have three classes of assessment of the job in terms of the risk level. So high demand would be red, medium would be yellow, low demand would be green. And this could come from many different assessment methods. And what was seen was that in the high and the medium, there were substantially more quality data sets. So as the load changed from low or green process to a high or medium, we had 6 to 8 times as many quality data sets. And in this study, they were excluding things due to product quality and parts difficulties. And so there could be many mechanisms related to our fatigue processes here. And in fact, this is one of the pieces that we're currently looking at in our Auto 21 project, to see whether we can see relationships here. So in terms of moving forwards to program as a whole, I'd just like to think about these 5 ideas. These are fairly general, and you could probably guess what I was going to say before I started to say it, but it kind of provides a basis on which to move forwards. So, fatigue is a process, and this is the definition that I'm giving you today. We hashed this around in a meeting yesterday, and everybody had some suggestions, and they're all good suggestions. But again, the part here is that it's a process, and it affects many, many systems. And there's an impairment in those systems. There are reasonable reasons why we'd expect fatigue to increase MSDs and safety risks. Again, those links are not made. And fatigue likely reduces quality, productivity, and increases errors. And there are specific examples of that. However, I think the last one is the hopeful piece, that we're not helpless before this, and you'll be hearing from the presenters as we move through the day that there are some approaches that we can use to address fatigue and its ill effects. And so that's what I'm waiting for. I'm very interested to hear what our speakers say, and I'm sure you are too. And by the end of the day, I think we'll have a picture of some of these approaches, and I really hope that that's going to generate some questions from your specific situation, from where you're coming from. So please write down those questions as it comes through, because I think we have a bunch of people talking to you today who can give you a lot of insights into this general area. So coming up to the plan for the day, it's all on our handy-dandy handout. And those of you who have QR codes on your phones can go directly to the website where we're going to have all the presentations, the videos, and we already have information on there. And so we start off in manufacturing, looking at rest and rest allowance recovery. We move on to a more micro look at actually how we get into the nitty-gritty of a particular cycle within a job, how we might assess that. And we hear in front of Jim Hart down there. The next piece that I want to look at is something that we're doing more and more of, which is sitting and standing. And so Jack Callahan is going to tell us a little bit about some of his work in seating and standing and how fatigue ties into that. After lunch, we're going to change gears a little bit, and we're going to now bring in some more risk factors and a broader view of fatigue. And so Ranjana Mehta is going to tell us, Dr. Ranjana Mehta, I should have everybody address the same here, is going to tell us about how the physical and cognitive interact. So we're going to broaden slightly there. And finally, we're going to hear from Dr. Michelle Morrissey, Dr. Michelle Robertson, Dr. Michelle Morrissey at the back here, so apologies. We're going to hear about a more, I would call it holistic, because I don't know if that is going to be the case, Michelle, but a broader look at working within an office environment that more and more of us are doing. So that's what we have planned for you. In terms of just a few more details, we have time for questions after the presentations. So that we can get those questions on video, I'd ask that you ask those questions with a microphone, and we have two gentlemen at the back, Amin and Marcus, who will be in the room with microphones. So if you do have a question, please indicate so with a hand or whatever is convenient, and they'll come and give you a microphone so that you can ask the question.